We're so glad that you're here today to talk about mastering executive efficiency. And that sounds kind of boring, but harnessing your calendar and your to-do list as shields. And of course, we think about them as shields because that's a much more exciting and interesting way to think about how important your calendar and your to-do lists are. And we're going to talk about those today. Why is that important? It's important because executives out there are busy and they're overwhelmed and they're stressed. And often they're working nights and weekends just to keep up with the demands, right? There's so much going on. There's so much going on in the world. There's so much going on in our various industries. And when people are feeling stressed out and overwhelmed, it can be very difficult to remain focused on what really matters. And that's why we need these shields. It's like, just think about that metaphor. Things are coming at us, and how do we hold the line on what's really important? All right, so that's where we're going to go today in our conversation. Please feel free to use the chat if you have questions, and if it makes sense to have an open conversation about whatever your question is, then we can actually have you come off mute and talk about it. Or if you prefer to just be a text, that's up to you too. If you'd like to come off of your muted video and I can see you, that would also be great for more interaction, but that's really your choice. It's up to you. All right, so let's dive in. So your calendar is a really important tool. And if you're not careful, welcome, Isabel. If you're not careful, other people can end up imposing their priorities on your calendar, right? It happens to me. It can happen to everybody. So this is a calendar, like nobody has a calendar that looks like this one. But just think about how quickly your calendar fills up with other priorities, other people's priorities. Think about how often do you have somebody in your organization that invites you to a meeting and they say, I just want to know, I want to make sure you know what's going on. Or you say, hey, what's going on with such and such a project? And they'll say, oh, I'll start inviting you to the meetings, and that way you can come up to speed. They are using their inability to communicate effectively as a way to put this on your calendar instead of it being on theirs. Now, of course, it's on their calendar too, but the communication part, they're absolving themselves of that responsibility. All right, but that's their priority, not yours. And it puts the burden on you to show up rather than put the burden on them to effectively communicate. All right, so what we want to do today is we're going to talk about turning that relationship around and using your calendar as a shield. And we'll talk about that, right, as we get going today. Your to-do list is also very similar. Somebody says to you, could you do this for me? And it sounds harmless. It sounds like I'm a nice person. Of course, I want to help somebody. But unless you use your to-do list as a shield, then again, their priorities end up on your list. And that's why you end up working nights and weekends to keep up, because you're spending your workday working on their thing and trying to satisfy their needs, and you're not paying attention and doing the work that you really need to do to get your own work done, right? And so how can you know what your work really is? You need a framework. You need a rock solid way to know what your priorities are. So that's what we're going to talk about next. And as we talk about that framework, we're going to be thinking about how does this enable us to use our to-do list and our calendar as shields. All right. So the framework is called scaling up. And you can use any framework you want. This doesn't have to be your framework. So I want you to think about the things that I'm talking about for scaling up. If you're using a different framework, that's fine. But I want you to then to think about how does that fit in with what I'm talking about today? So scaling up has 4 decisions that you've got to get right: people, strategy, execution, and cash. And all of them will relate to list as shields. Varnish, writing the book Mastering the Rock Habits in the late 90s, and then scaling up was his next book. That's really the framework book right now that has all the details and is the textbook of the work that we do. And many, many companies, thousands of companies all around the world, tens of thousands of companies use the scaling up system. Then he re-released Mastering the Rockefeller Habits just a couple of years ago, because Mastering the Rockefeller Habits, the original, is a much more readable book than Scaling Up. Scaling Up is really like a textbook level, and you want to go there for all the details. But if you want to just get into things, then reading Mastering the Rockefeller Habits makes sense. And then one of the things that we've learned from Vern is the importance of naming. And so he came out with this newest book, Start to Scale, just last fall. And Start to Scale is really the book that I recommend. If you don't know anything about the scaling up world, I recommend reading the book Start to Scale. It will get you inspired. It will give you some pieces of the framework. It will give you the overview. And that way you have enough to get yourself started. And then when you want to go deeper, you can ask us for help. And we will happy to work with you, or you can read the book Scaling Up to go deeper. All right. But these are the books that are the overview of the system Scaling Up. Scaling Up is written for mid-market businesses. And so what do we mean by mid-market? You know, if you're between 10 million a year and $1 billion, you're mid-market, right? You're past the startup phase, but you're not yet a whale, right? You're not yet one of those elephants, one of those dinosaurs. All right. So inside the Scaling Up system, we want to look first. How do you find your priorities? To be able to use your to-do list and your calendar as shields, you have to know what's most important. How do you do that? You use the one-page strategic plan. So this is obviously an eye chart. You can't possibly read this. It's too small. But this is one-page strategic plan, and we're happy to send this to you, and you'll be able to zoom in and use it on your own. There are 3 sections, 3 color-coded sections. We color-coded them. Vern, his is black and white. It's not color-coded this way, but we find it's very helpful to think about 3 different areas of the business. The gray part is your core values, your core purpose, and your core competencies. You need to have those. We're not going to talk about those today. That's outside the scope. But assuming you've got those, then the blue part is strategy, your strategic thinking. And by the way, one-page strategic plan is a bit of a misnomer. There's no such thing as a strategic plan. You have an execution plan. That's the yellow part. The yellow part is your execution plan. Your blue part is your strategic thinking. You have to have a strategy. And when you have a strategy, then you can execute that strategy. So we're going to start here in this box, and that is the BHAG. And you can't see that, but that's okay. Don't worry about that. What is a BHAG? Jim Collins' term for a big, hairy, audacious goal. Many of you are probably familiar with that term. For those that aren't, just a brief overview. It is a 10 to 30-year goal. We recommend 10 years. We recommend if you were going to choose a BHAG today, you would have a goal of, by 2035, we will do blank, whatever the blank is. And again, the details of your BHAG are beyond the scope of this webinar, but you can certainly reach out and we can talk more about it if you're interested in going deeper on that topic. So that comes from Jim Collins. Your BHAG sets the context then for the rest of your strategic thinking and then for your execution planning. And remember, we are here to use our to-do lists and our calendars as shields. How do we do that? We have to know what's most important. So it ladders all the way back up to the BHAG, your 10-year goal. From your BHAG then, this arrow represents our thinking goes into our 3-year priorities. What are our 3-year priorities? What is our business going to look like? Most businesses that use the Scaling Up system, they think about roughly doubling in the next 3 years. And you have to think about what are your priorities. What needs to be true 3 years from now that's not true today? What's a key market segment that you're not in right now that you need to be, for example, if that's important for your BHAG, for reaching your BHAG? Or what's a key capability that you don't have right now that you need to have in 3 years? Or what's a key differentiator that you need to have to separate yourself from your competitors? So those are the kinds of things that you think about to create your 3-year. Now, we could spend a whole hour just talking about how you create your 3-year, or we could spend a whole hour just on your BHAG. So reach out to me if you want to go deeper on those. But let's assume that you have your BHAG, that you've created your 3-year priorities, and then those become the context for what do we need to do this year. Your annual priorities is where your execution begins. Your execution plan begins with the yellow. It's all of the yellow, but it begins with the annual. The annual is the biggest part of your execution plan. So you're going to say, what's the 1-year portion of that 3-year? If one of my 3-year priorities is to have a certain key capability then that I don't have now, well, what do I need to get done this year to make that true? So that would be 2025 in this case, if we're talking about today and planning out your year. All right, now we just have a couple more steps before we get all the way down to the level of our calendars and our to-do lists, but you have to put them in context because out of context, there's really no way to prioritize. So your annual then becomes the context for creating your quarter. And your quarterly priorities, we call them rocks, which is a Stephen Covey term. If you don't put the rocks in the bucket first, before you put the pebbles in the sand in, you put the sand in first, the rocks aren't going to fit. And what are the rocks in this metaphor? The rocks are those most important things. You can think about them as projects. If you think about your priorities as projects, this next part, when we get to our calendars and our to-do list, is going to make a lot more sense. When you think about each of your quarterly rocks as a project, right? They're the most important projects that have to get done in your organization in the next 90 days. Some of them, of course, are going to last longer than 90 days, but what's the portion of that larger project that you are going to get done in the next 90 days? If you're running a marathon, you might be concerned about your first mile split, or you might be concerned about where will you be 1 hour into that race? How far will you have run? The same thing is true here. If you have priorities that are going to span more than 1 quarter, which they probably are, they're part of an annual initiative, they're part of a 3-year priority, they're part of a 3-year thrust, they're part of your BHAG. So we're talking about a very long race, 10 years plus. What has to happen in the next 90 days? From there, from your company quarterly priorities, now you cascade that into you as an individual, to you as an individual leader, and potentially as the leader of the team that you lead. You want to think about the priorities that you need to be working on, and you need to think about the priorities that your team needs to be working on, the team that you lead. It could be, if you're the head of operations, you're dealing with the company priorities on one hand, and then, all right, what's our role in operations to make those company projects be true, right? And again, we're getting there. We're almost there to our calendars and our to-do lists. So just a reminder for those that came after I gave my quick hello and introduction, if you have questions or comments, please put them in the chat. I'm happy to address anything that you've got that's coming up for you or specific situations in your company. All right, so now you've got your individual priorities for you or the team that you lead. That becomes then the context for the next part of the conversation. And you want to ask these 3 questions. What should we start doing? What should we stop doing? And what should we keep doing? Everybody on this call, every leader I've ever met, they're all good at the start doing list. Because every time somebody's got new ideas and we say, oh, we're going to do that, well, then we brainstorm and we come up with, all right, how are we going to make that true? So the start doing list is not a problem. But we have to make sure that when we think of the start doing list, we also remember we don't have an infinite amount of time. And adding something new to the list means something's got to be dropped off the list. So what should we stop doing? Sometimes the things that we stop doing are harder, much harder to come up with than the things we start doing. And I would say that's true most of the time. And it's true because when we stop doing something, we're going to disappoint somebody. We're going to disappoint ourselves. We're going to disappoint our boss. We're going to disappoint our peers. We're going to disappoint our direct reports. Somebody cares. We might disappoint customers or even vendors. We're going to disappoint people when we stop doing things. And so your brain might decide, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep doing everything and then I'm going to do the new thing. The fact is, it just doesn't work. You have to think about where your highest leverage activities are and what can we stop doing that will allow us to free up time, resources, energy, money in order to spend on the things that really matter to move our business forward. If we keep doing everything the way we've always done it, we're going to continue to get the same results, which for most of us, we want more. Even when we've been highly successful, which I'm sure most or all of you have been. You wouldn't be on this call if you weren't already highly successful. Your business wouldn't be where it is if you didn't have anything going for you, right? So we want to build on that to say what's possible now. The keep doing question is essential because some of our habits allowed us to get where we are. We are successful because of our successful habits. The keep doing list makes sure that we remember what those things are and we don't let those get crowded out. Some of us have had this experience of having a really good habit of physical fitness, for example, and then having the gym get crowded out because of a new project at work. And that doesn't work because that's going to leave us with less energy and less ability to get the things done that we want to get done. So we have to keep those essential habits on the keep doing list. So that reminds us. All right, let me see my notes here. What else I want to talk about with this slide. Just one more thing about the start doing list, right? There's never any shortage on the start doing list. But the question is, what are the one or two things that will make the most difference? If you ask yourself that question, then you might think about the things on the stop doing list. Maybe we don't stop doing them altogether, but I stop doing them and I delegate them to somebody else who might be able to do it either in less time or more efficiently, or it might be less expensive because I'm getting paid more than they are. And that's something they can do, but I've been doing it just by rote or by habit up till now. So sometimes a stop doing is really delegate, but it's much better to stop doing it entirely. Think about all those reports. Somebody asked you for a report one time, and then every month from all time, you're creating that report. But they don't need it anymore. They only need it at one time. So having these conversations about what could we stop doing and having those conversations with the people in your organization can be very powerful. All right. Very good. So here's a calendar. I put this together as a way for us to think about how can we use our calendar as a shield. When you know what the priorities are, when you know what the rocks are, you put those on your calendar first. First, that's what the green represents on this calendar. So it says rock focus time, and I've got that from 8 to 9:30 every day. Now, maybe 8 to 9:30 doesn't work for you. That's fine. Adapt this for you. I just made this as an example to say, look, if I were to spend 5 days a week, an hour and a half on my rocks, well, that's a lot of time. An hour and a half out of an 8 or 9 hour workday, that's a lot of time. Why would I do that? I'm using my calendar as a shield to repel the things that by definition are not the most important things. How can I say that by definition? Because the rocks, the quarterly priorities, those projects that we have to get done this quarter to move the business forward, by definition, those are the most important things. And I can't tell you how many times I ask an executive, hey, show me your calendar. And I look and the rocks aren't on it. Their calendar is filled with all kinds of meetings. They're meetings with team members. They're meeting with customers. They're meeting with vendors. They're meeting with the CEO, right? And this is true for the CEO too. It's filled with meetings, but the rocks aren't there. So I want you to think about this for yourself. Are your priorities on your calendar? If they're not, you're not acting as if they're real priorities. You're acting as if there's something I'll get to at the end of the day if I have time, if I have extra time. That's not a priority. That's the opposite of a priority. You're saying that those other things are the priority. So on this example calendar, I put them first thing in the morning when you're fresh, right? When you have the ability to move one of those rocks forward. You have the ability to move a critical project for your business forward. Keep in mind, again, this is just an example. Maybe it's an hour a day for you, not an hour and a half. Maybe it's a half an hour a day. If you think about how busy you are right now, and you think about how painful you are feeling this is going to be to change the way you handle your calendar, a baby step is a very powerful tool, right? Think about babies, literal babies. How do they take their first step, right? They take a step, they fall down. They take a step, they fall down. They take a step, they fall down. They keep trying. Once they take one step, well, then they're steady, right? They might wobble a little bit and then they get steady and then they're ready to take another step. And pretty soon, success breeds success. So don't worry about the idea that maybe you're only going to spend 10 minutes a day on your priority. Put it on your calendar. Protect that time, right? So don't be intimidated by my suggestion that it could be an hour and a half a day. Maybe that's the more advanced version. Think about the first grade version, not the second grade version or the graduate school version. Think about what could you do right now? Could you find an hour a week? If so, put it on your calendar. Start somewhere rather than just dismissing this idea out of hand. All right. So notice that I've got that hour and a half and it just says rock focus time. I could get more specific than that. I could put a specific rock. Maybe I'm only accountable for one out of the rocks. Maybe my company has 3 or 4 rocks. And then my division, the division that I lead, is responsible for really taking one of those rocks and moving it forward. So maybe I want to write the name of the rock right here in my calendar. Or maybe I'm involved in 2 rocks. And so I have rock focus time for rock 1 and then rock 2, and I want to name them. I'm responsible for the marketing rock. And so I say, we're going to research and hire a new marketing company, or we're going to, whatever it is. We're going to create the 3-year marketing plan and have it operational by the end of the quarter. I want to write that. I want to write it very specifically, because by writing it specifically, I will remember in my brain how important this is and how the quarterly priority connects to the annual, connects to the 3-year, and connects to the BHAG. Okay, that's how you use your calendar then as a shield, because if you protect that time and somebody calls a meeting with you during this time, well, you're not available. You're not available. And if you're not available, if you were meeting with a customer, you wouldn't be available, right? If somebody on a team that you work with calls a meeting during a time when you're meeting with a customer, you would just be not available. These items, the rocks, have to be that important. They're as important as a major customer. Now, I know that sometimes if you're meeting with a minor customer and something big comes up with a major customer, you might move that minor customer. I get it. You have to move something. And when you move something, you have to move it somewhere else. You're not going to leave that minor customer off in la la land, right? You're not just going to cancel the meeting and not come back to them. That would be a foolish way to run your business. The same has to be true for your rocks. When you move rock focus time, move it to another time. All right. There's a few other things that I want to talk about on the calendar, the way that I've laid it out here. These are just suggestions. The daily huddle is a very important way to use your calendar wisely. People often say, I'm in too many meetings, I'm in too many meetings. And paradoxically, the solution to that is actually having more meetings. I don't mean more in quantity, I just mean more in terms of focus. The daily huddle, so for example, this is a calendar. I pretended that I am the head of ops, right? So I said I'm going to have an ops daily huddle every day at 9:30, right when my rocks focus time is over. And then because I'm the head of ops, I'm part of the executive team. And so then I'm going to go to the executive daily huddle 4 days a week. The 5th day a week, I have my executive team weekly meeting. And maybe that happens at 9:45. And then I have my ops weekly meeting 1 day a week as well. So notice what else I did. Rock 1 working group and Rock 2 working group. So in this example, I'm going to meet once a week with the people that are working on those rocks. And notice I schedule those meetings for 50 minutes to give us a little flex time to go to the bathroom, maybe get a snack, maybe walk outside, get the sun on our face or some wind. Taking care of our body just for a couple minutes in between meetings can be very important, especially in the world of a lot of virtual meetings now. We just don't create any slack time in our schedule. And that also doesn't give us any time for meetings to run over. So I scheduled all those meetings a little bit shorter than going right up to the hour. So that's what I did with the green. The green is my priorities. Those are the things that ladder up to my rocks. The pink here, that is internal meetings inside our company. So I've got a couple different kinds, right? I have my ops weekly meeting. I have my executive team weekly. I have a supply chain biweekly, a meeting every Tuesday and Thursday, just the supply chain group. Maybe there's others like that. That's fine. You can take those into account. I'm not saying you shouldn't meet to do the daily work of getting the work done. But as a leader, you need to be spending more time thinking about and backing up and spending more time on how is next quarter going to be better than this quarter. If you are spending time in the day-to-day, in the operation of your business, in just getting product out the door, getting the services delivered to your customers, if you're spending time there, you're not actually spending time leading. You're spending time managing. So I want to encourage you to step back and think about what is the time I need to be doing spent leading, not just managing. If you got right now, let's just say you're only working 40 hours a week. That's fine. You're working 40 hours a week and you're spending 1 hour right now leading and 39 hours executing. Okay. How do you take that 39 hours and reduce it to 38? Right? Daily huddles might be enough. That might be enough to get you there. And we can talk another time about daily huddles. We've done webinars about that. We have blog posts about that. If you're interested in daily huddles or in any of the rest of our meeting rhythms, you can search our website or you can ask me, and I'm happy to send you more materials that help you with the meeting rhythms, because that's a whole nother module. We could easily spend another hour on that. So the pink, by color coding. So forget about the details of this calendar. What I want you to get from this is by color coding, you then have a clear view of what kinds of activities that you're participating in. If you have something in green and you have a major client, a major customer that needs to impose on that green time, okay, but that needs to be responded to right away. You deal with the customer, and then you reschedule the green item. And the green item probably goes to go to the top because that is your rock. That's the thing that's most important. Your pink items, those are internal meetings. You might more easily schedule over those or move them if a green thing or a customer thing comes up. I put customer things in orange here, or whatever color that is. I don't know if that's orange or I don't know, whatever color. I'm not an artist. I have video meeting with supplier A. I have video meeting with supplier B. You might have different things in your business. Whatever colors you want to use is fine, but use different colors to show, okay, this is a customer thing. I'm not going to move that. And then the purple things I have time for to-dos, working on my to-do list, or triaging new email. Maybe I'm triaging new email at the end of the day. And what do I mean by triage? I'm dealing with the things that I can deal with right away, or if they're related to the focus time that I need to have, to the projects that I need to be working on, then I schedule that for the next day, or I schedule that for later on today. If I'm triaging early in the day, I might have some time to work on whatever's coming in. But I have to work on it in the context of my priorities, which is what I mean when I say that your to-do list and your calendar are shields. They're shields because somebody says, hey, can you come to this meeting? I say, well, let me see. How does it fit into my priorities? And my priorities are already on the calendar. And so if I've blocked out time, then that makes me double check and double think. If somebody invites me to a meeting just so that I can be informed about what's going on in their area, well, can't they make a summary and send me something that I could then read in 5 minutes instead of having to spend an hour at a meeting? I don't have to be in every meeting. If I do have to be in every meeting, you got to really ask yourself, do I have the right people? Have I hired people who are actually doing their jobs? If I have to be in every meeting, what are they doing? Are they doing their jobs? How much can I delegate? So I really want you thinking about delegation, and I want you to think about the people that work for you, and are they doing their jobs? You getting out of the day-to-day of all the details is the only way to scale. You can only do so much. You've been successful making a lot of decisions, getting to the place you are in your career right now. Whether you're an executive or whether you're the CEO, you have made a lot of decisions in order to get where you are. But the fact is, what got you here won't get you there. You have to get out of making so many decisions. So I want you thinking about that. Your to-do list, same thing in terms of a shield. You have to have your to-do list at every meeting. You have to have your calendar at every meeting. Because when you're at that meeting, to-dos are going to come up. There's going to be actions that come up. And when you can say, oh yeah, I can get that done, it's going to be a week from Friday, right? Because you're looking at your calendar and you know what's important. It's already there. And you're looking at your to-do list and you know what's already there. And you know what you need to maybe move down your list or where this fits. Does it fit right at the top or does it fit somewhere down below? It would go to the top if it's a rock, right? If it's one of the priorities, it probably goes right to the top of the to-do list. But that's where your discernment comes in. Because if there's a customer item on there, maybe the customer thing's at the top. Often we're trying to look at our to-do list and just pick random things or pick things that are easy to do. We're not thinking about them strategically. We're not thinking about them in terms of, are we moving our rocks forward? So when somebody asks me to do something, whether it's in a meeting or whether it's a one-off, whether it's my boss asking me or a direct report asking me or a peer, I have to be thinking about the context of my priorities. What do priorities mean? How many of us actually know what our priorities are for a given quarter? And then you zoom in and say, well, what do I need to do this week? So if you read 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, many of you have, probably most of you have, but if you haven't read it since college or you haven't read it for a long time, I highly recommend going back to that book again. The concept of every Sunday night, or you could do it Friday afternoon before you leave, of thinking about the next week and thinking about all of my commitments and thinking about all of my roles. Not only my role as the head of operations, but my role as a member of the executive team and my role as a direct report to the CEO. Those are 3 different roles. My role as a dad, my role as a community member, right? Might be my role on a nonprofit board, my role as a spouse. What are the things that I need to advance next week for each of those roles and making sure that those are scheduled, right? Knowing that it's really important for me to be at my kids' volleyball match on Saturday means that I can't rely on extra work over the weekend. right? And knowing that that's important. And maybe there are other weekends where I am willing to do work on a Saturday during the day, but that's a choice. And that's integrating my work and my life. And I'm not just going to default to that, because if I just default to that, then somebody else's priorities are going to end up running my life. And I'm going to miss that volleyball match. I'm going to miss that tournament. And that's going to hurt my relationships, right? So I want you to think about both personal and business, that the same applies to business. Somebody asks you for help. How many times you have a good relationship and so you want to help that person? And so you say yes to something, but it doesn't actually match your priorities. You might not even realize why that leaves you feeling anxious. It leaves you feeling anxious and upset because you're doing things that don't advance your rocks. And then you get to the end of the quarter and people say, well, how come such and such didn't get done? How come this rock didn't get done? And you say, oh, there's this emergency and that emergency, and I had to do this and had to do that. Well, you're not effectively delegating and you're not effectively predicting the future. Be honest with yourself. How many of the interruptions that you deal with on a daily and a weekly basis happen over and over and over again? Be honest. The things that are happening over and over again, you can plan for. You can't plan for a certain thing happening at a certain day and a certain time. But if you know it's predictable that I have a problematic customer and it's likely that they're going to have an issue once or twice a quarter, or we have a problematic product line that needs fixes of various kinds a couple times a quarter because we haven't had our quality assurance system, where it needs to be. Well, maybe that's the next quarterly rock, is to deal with the quality assurance system. But maybe even before that is to build in some slack time in your schedule for dealing with emergencies. And you put that on the calendar and you don't schedule over it, right? Because you just don't know where that's going to come in. All right, so let's recap. How do you use your calendar and your to-do list as a shield? You bring them with you all the time. You're clear on what your priorities are, what the rocks are, what the things are that you have to move forward, that go at the top of the list. If somebody has something that they need you to do, want you to do, request you to do, whether it's your boss or anybody else, you bring those out. All right, given my context here, I can do the thing you're saying to do, boss. Hey, CEO, okay, I'm the head of operations. CEO comes to me and says, hey, I need you to do such and such. Okay, CEO, but remember, we set these rocks, and if I do that for you, this rock is going to be in jeopardy because this is how I've got it scheduled out this week. And then the CEO can either say, yes, I want you to change your priorities, or they can say, all right, I'll find somebody else to do it. Or they can say, well, it doesn't actually, this thing I'm asking for doesn't really need to be done this week. It could be done next week or the week after. Is that work? And then you're looking at your calendar and you're looking at your to-do list and you negotiate. Can I do that or not do that? So, questions about using your calendar and your to-do list as shields. I want you really thinking about that metaphor, that shield metaphor, right? Things are coming at you. They're coming at you all the time. Mostly, for most of us, they're not life and death. A shield kind of raises the stakes, right? You think about life and death and a shield, you put a shield up in front of an incoming arrow and you save your life. Using the metaphor here, using your to-do list and your calendar as a shield can protect you and the rest of your importance, the importance of what you're trying to do. And by the way, you could teach this to the people around you. Everybody in your company, if everybody's doing this, then you can be almost guaranteed that your rocks are going to get done. The most important things are going to get done, rather than everybody's priorities just bleeding over into everybody else's. Right? I'm not a fan of silos, by the way, of everybody just putting their head down and saying, that's not my job. That's not what I'm talking about. But you schedule when is the right time to be having those cross-departmental working groups. Maybe it's a rock. Maybe it's something that we want, as the operations team, we want to build relationships with the sales team this quarter, and that becomes one of our rocks. And so we build in a couple of events. And the sales team and the operations leaders are having a lunch once a month. And that becomes part of the calendar because it's one of those most important things. We don't just leave it to chance. We don't leave it to, wow, as the operations team, we have a strained relationship with the sales team. And well, let's try to make it better this quarter. Yeah, we got to be specific. You got to get it on the calendar. And then it becomes a shield. Oh, some emergency happens. Well, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm not going to deal with that emergency because this is important. Or I will deal with that emergency and we're going to reschedule this lunch for tomorrow. But if somebody asks me something that's not an emergency, that is, something that maybe it's their emergency, but it's not mine. Maybe they just need to deal with it. They need to figure it out. If you keep solving everybody else's problems, your job gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And what do you need them for at that point? If you're doing their job, why do you need them? So I want you to think about how much this empowers everybody around you. When you are putting up the shield to stop them from putting their priorities on you and your workday, you are empowering them to make their own choices, to make their own decisions, to get better at their own job, to do their own learning. And yeah, you can help them. Somebody asks you something that's going to take 8 hours and you say, well, I don't have time to do 8 hours. Look at my calendar. I would have to give up things that are too important, but I could meet with you for 15 minutes. Would that 15 minutes be useful to help you get unstuck and give you a direction and then you can go do the work? Think about that. It's not all or nothing. Think about how you use your creative brain to create something where it's a win-win, right? And using your calendar so that you are really clear what your priorities are and you're not just a leaf in the wind, but you're actually choosing. And that's your job as a leader. Your job as a leader is to choose and to make decisions. And those decisions have to be aligned with where the organization is going, where the company is going. That's what it means to be a leader. And if you don't want to do that, if you want somebody else to set your agenda or you want somebody else to tell you what to do, well, then you're not being a leader. And if that bothers you, if that makes you frustrated or angry, or you have a feeling about that, well, I would like take a look. Take a look. Where am I being a leader? If you're the CEO and you're hearing all this and you're thinking, oh my God, I wish people would just do their jobs. Well, this is a great way to continue to empower them. As a CEO or a leader of any kind, I want you to take away one question. When somebody comes to you with a question or something they want you to do, I want you to ask them this question. Why are you asking me this question? No emotion in it. It doesn't have to be a judgmental question. You could ask it in a judgmental way. I'm not suggesting that. You could say, why are you asking me this question? I'm not suggesting that. I think you can do it in a very easy way. You could say, why are you asking me this question? And then they can tell you. There's so many different kinds of answers to that question. They could say, well, I really just don't know what to do. I'm really stuck. Okay, well, how can I help? Well, I'd like you to tell me what to do. All right, well, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Or maybe you are. You get to choose. Maybe you will tell them what to do that time, or maybe it's a training opportunity and you're going to help them do the brainstorm and think through it themselves. You could also say to them, well, pretend you were me and you didn't have anybody to ask, what would you do? They probably have a pretty good answer. Even if their answer is not the same as what you would give, your answer back most of the time needs to be, okay, great, go do that, right? That's fantastic. But they might come to you saying, what should I do? And they do have an idea and they don't want to share it with you because they're worried. They want to test you. They want to make sure you know. They're probably better at answering this question anyway because it's their job, not yours. And so when you say, why are you asking me this question? Then they can say, well, I have an answer, but I just wanted to see what you would say. They may or may not be honest about that. But if you can get underneath and get them to say their idea, then you can say, okay, sounds good to me. Or you can ask a question. Well, have you thought about XYZ? Sometimes when you get good at this, when you get good at saying, why are you asking me this question? The person standing in front of your desk will say, okay, never mind. And they'll turn around and walk away. Because you giving them clarity that they already know what to do. They're just using you as a security blanket. If you can get to that point, you have freed yourself up massively because they get to go do their job and you get to be freed up to be back on your priorities, the priorities that are really going to move things forward. So I want you to think about that in terms of delegation. All right, so let me pause and see any questions. And I have a question for you. You don't have to answer this to me, but I want you to think about this question. How much of what we learned and discussed today did you already know? Just ask yourself that question as a percentage. Maybe you know everything that I said today. So that's 100%. 100% of what we learned and discussed today you already knew. Maybe it was 50%. I don't know. Just think about that for yourself. You might even write it down. But then I want you to go further. How much of what we learned and discussed today are you actually doing? Because knowing something and doing it are totally different. So as you leave today, I want you thinking about the practicality of what we talked about today. And I want you to think about what is one thing that you can put into practice from today's webinar in the next 24 hours. And even better, if you do it today. If you do it today, before today's workday ends, I want you thinking about one thing that we learned today or that we talked about today, whether you learned it for the first time or not. What's one thing from today that you can put into practice heading forward? All right, Assured Strategy has a wealth of knowledge. We are a coaching firm with many coaches, and we have all different kinds of practice areas. We all are versed in the scaling up system, but we have workshops that you can come to face-to-face. The next workshop is in Tampa, Florida. I am co-leading that with Michelle Berry out of Boston. My name is Ted Sarvata, and I'm out of the Portland, Oregon market. I'm actually on the Washington side of the Columbia River, but I will be in Tampa on February 25th and 26th. Michelle and I are co-leading the Scaling Up workshop on the 25th, and on the 26th, Michelle is leading and I am co-facilitating the Leadership Circle workshop. Fantastic tool as a 360 to really think about what are the leadership qualities of your team and how are they not being used to their fullest potential. And then we have another Scaling Up workshop in Dallas on April 8th. And we'd love to see you at any of those workshops. The workshops are paid opportunities. We'd love to have you there. They're very nominal cost, very high impact workshops, and you can spend a whole day thinking about all the different kinds of the system, and you leave there with action. You leave there creating action for your business. And then we also have upcoming webinars, February 6th, February 13th, March 13th. We'd love to have you sign up for any of those webinars. Those are free. Those are free. The next one on February 6th is bringing it all together. Earlier, we talked about people, strategy, execution, and cash. That's what the focus is going to be there. On February 13th, focused on unlocking your business's cash potential. And then March 13th, from dysfunctional to functional. You may have read The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Pat Lencioni. We use this with all of our clients. Basically, every interaction, we are in that book in some way. We would love to spend some time with you thinking about your team and working on your team and how can you take steps to make more function out of dysfunction. And then we have some free offers for you. We have a business valuation. You can use that QR code, take a snap of that with your phone to get a free business valuation of your business. We're also happy to do a free DISC assessment for you. So you may be familiar with DISC. DISC is one of a suite of tools that we use to help teams, help individuals on teams create more self-awareness about themselves and how different behaviors play out based on people's behavioral types. And we have a couple of other indexes that we use, but the assessment is the DISC assessment is the first one. And we're happy to have you take that as well. All right. Thank you very much. My name is Ted Sarvata. You can email me if you'd like to get in touch. We will be following up with each of you after the fact and see if there's anything that we can further help you with. If there are tools that I talked about that you're interested in or resources, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to be a resource for you. Our job, of course, is to help businesses scale. That's what we do, and to create freedom for leaders, right? We guide leaders through change to find their freedom. What is that freedom for you, and how could we assist you? How could we help you as we move forward? I'll stay for a couple more minutes in case there are questions, but otherwise, thank you all for coming. I'm really glad to have you here. Take care.